he said, listen, give me 2 years. You'll never want to come back. The adventure of a lifetime, and nobody will know you're gone.
You get deployed at 17 and a half. And now I was deployed from the New York Athletic Club. And we got actually deployed right out of the locker room from, you get beamed up to the ship, and then the ship takes off and you're gone for 20 years.
It's a very hard pill to swallow, but that's exactly how I experienced it. I was taken at 10 years old. I was taken and I was worked through several black programs. I was privately owned in the beginning. I did six or 7 years on Earth.
That's when all the stuff for the programs began for me. Specifically, the tracking that they had been doing since I was a kid, it followed me all the way through the military. And at that point, when I got to Diego Garcia, that's where I was taken off planet.
Kind of like opened that floodgate for me. And then all of these recalls started coming in, and I was just like, oh my gosh. And the way I was describing it, she's like, I've never had this with a client, but you're describing a parallel life right now.
It's a combination of human and other species. I was able to remember the name on their uniform. It's USS Arcorp. That was putting me through some kind of recruitment tests from age 3 until 12. And 12 is when I was potentially, taken.
He said, with your scores, I guarantee you'll make commander and you'll make pilot. And I said, pilot of what? And he said, 4-kilometer long Starship. He told me what was going to happen. He says, you volunteer for the program, we'll put you in, you'll do 20 years, we'll send you back in time 20 years, age regress you 20 years, wipe your memory, and you'll just wake up in bed like nothing happened.
It's almost beyond words. It's beyond comprehension of how this could happen. Whoever's masterminding this, the Air Force, working with extraterrestrials, working with a lot of pretty wild technology, which I'll also get into. It's really beyond fathomable. It's beyond fathomable.
Hey guys, welcome back. A few things before we get started. Hopewell Farms CBD new promo code is back to Journey to Truth 10. That gets you 10% off all CBD products. And that's going to go, I think they're going to do a 420 sale, which will be 20% off. So stay tuned for that. But until then, 10% off with Journey to Truth 10. And don't forget about the Omnia Radiation Balancer. If you guys are looking to protect yourself from 5G towers or all the above, any radiation coming in, it's a patch that you stick on your phone or any radiating device, harmonizes the frequency and turns it into something less harmful or actually not harmful at all for you. I have them on all my devices. There's actually one right here in the microphone, and they're really amazing products. So 10% off of those with promo code TRUTH, all caps. And we're actually going to be having Tim Sanders back on hopefully this month. They have some new pendants out, and he's going to give us some new updates on some of the current projects they're working on. So I'm excited about that. And don't forget to grab a ticket to our conference, Secret Space Conference. You guys just watched the promo for that. We're really excited. We're really excited for that. It's going to be here before we know it. So grab a ticket, come hang out with us. And if you're like our guest and you're over in Australia or somewhere else in the world, live stream tickets are available for 111. And all that information is on the link, secretspaceconference.info. One last promo code, 20 and back, gets you 20% off all of our Teespring merch. So take advantage of that. And we're going to run that through the conference also. That out of the way, today we are joined by James Bartley. If you guys aren't familiar with him, he has vast knowledge of reptilians and other related topics, but he's done some incredible lectures before, and I'm an experiencer, and a lot that he covers actually It's things that I have personally experienced, and he's an experiencer also. So we're obviously gonna cover that, and we're gonna just spread the awareness and let people know how deep this infiltration goes, because honestly, it's been the basis behind the reality of our matrix for eons now. And we need to expose this, because that's the only way we're going to really get past it. So welcome to the show, James.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Aaron. I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. This is something that, like I said, it's unfortunately near and dear to my heart, but I think, we're all put in these positions for a reason, and what better way to expose it than to know it inside out? And I know you know it inside out also. So, really, how did this start for you? What happened in your life that made you start this research?
The catalyzing event or series of events was when I came back from Germany in September 1990. I was there for a summer language program, and after that was over, then I flew back to San Jose, California, where I lived at the time. Now, I'd had a series of events throughout my life, but I didn't have a conceptual framework with which to understand it. To me, there were just a series of anomalous events, some of them which I would have categorized at the time as psychic, for lack of a better term. I did have UFO sightings. I did have things which I believe were UFO related, but at the time, I didn't really want to go in that direction because, the implications were too frightening, quite frankly. You know what I mean? Because by then I'd read about Travis Walton's experience. I'd read about Calvin Parker's experience in Pascagoula, Mississippi, because I've always been an avid reader about this stuff, right? So I had a series of events in childhood, teenage years, going into my adult life, and for me, I'm one of those guys where it comes around in cycles. Every few years, I have another series of events, and they run the gamut from full-on physical encounters to astral abductions, astral dreamscape, stage-managed dreams, as I call them. Just a variety of things, a lot of synchronistic events, a lot of close UFO sightings. So I didn't really put it together until I came back from Germany. And just to back up a little bit, a couple of weeks before I was due to go back, fly out of Zurich and go back to California, I started having that prodromal feeling again, feeling of being watched, a creepy feeling of, presences, what have you. At the time, I lived on a guest house on the banks of the Rhine, and along the banks of the Rhine there, the banks are very steep. And so I was at a guest house, a large guest house, and my room was the very top room of the whole guest house, right? So when I left my light on there, it was like a beacon. Everyone across the river in Switzerland, if they happen to be there, could see that whoever is in that guest house, in that top room, they've got their lights on, right? Well, I started sleeping with my lights on again because I was getting that creepy, crawly feeling. And people were telling me, "Oh, you were up late last night, huh?" And didn't know what to tell them. Along the banks of the Rhine there's a stretch of about 90, 100 feet where they've taken the dense foliage, because right there on the banks of the Rhine River on the German side, that's where the German side of the Black Forest ends, the Black Forest of Grimm's fairy tales and all that, right? So a lot of dense foliage. And what they did along this one stretch of the river bank there, they had a pedestrian sidewalk. And what they did was they took the dense foliage, and either it grew naturally this way or they kind of molded it, so to speak, so that it was a tunnel, okay? And then like the last two weeks I was there, there's no illumination there. It was pitch black. I dreaded having to walk through that tunnel of foliage. So it sounds corny, but I took the sprinting through there. Okay, here we go. And then I would just put my head in, like Ricky Henderson, like heading for home plate. You know what I mean? Just sprinting through there to get the other side, where I can breathe a sigh of relief. Sleeping with the lights on again. So that was the lead up. And then I get on the plane, go back to California, And here I am back in San Jose, California, which has always been a hotspot of UFO, ET, deep black military activity.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of spooky aerospace, intelligence-related activity there. Just a stone's throw away for about 15, 20-minute drive from where I live in northern San Jose was where Lockheed Missile and Space is, the Blue Cube, the NSA tracking facility, NASA Ames, et cetera, et cetera. It was all there. And then, not coincidentally, it was around that area, not too far from where I live, where Silicon Valley, as we now understand it, really developed. So that whole place has always been very spooky, always very, tilted towards the supernatural, if you will. So here I am back in San Jose, and then just in a matter of several days, a couple of weeks after coming back, I had a series of UFO events, one of which was a gray ET looking out at me through my TV. If you remember the old days, it wasn't this 24/7 cable TV coverage. After a certain point in time, 2:30 a.m., they would do the national anthem. The color bands would show up on the screen, and then it would turn into snow, right? If you remember.
I don't. We're too young for that, but I know exactly what you're talking
I've heard
about.
it. Yeah.
That's what it used to be like.
Right.
I used to have an 8-track player underneath my 71 Plymouth Roadrunner. Okay. Kind of dating myself.
And
but,
for the record, really quick, don't feel silly about being scared like that, because when this started happening for me, I was 25, 26 years old, and I found myself afraid of the dark, afraid to go to bed, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And I know I can relate, but yeah, continue.
Well, also what some of these ETs do is they like to play with synchronicities. They like to time and synchronize things that have a real impactful meaning to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that played a part in it. So anyway,
yes, we need to cover that.
I fell asleep with the lights on again. TV was on, and in my mind's eye, okay, I'm laying there sleeping, but I had a split screen image in my mind, if you will. One half of my consciousness was in my bedroom looking at my TV screen, which was snow. The other half of my split screen in my mind, as I'm laying there sleeping, was my brother in his room, the other side of the house. And he's still up. He's got his TV on, right? So what happened was then this gray face showed up amidst the snow. And then it started, lack of a better term, zapping me in my brain. I could feel these electrical currents, jolts, seemingly emanating from my TV right into my brain.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But that was one half of the mental image. The other half was my brother in his room, seeing the same gray image coming out of the snow on his TV. And he was wide awake. Now, in order to test his reality, he punched his dresser. Boom. Like a lot of abductees, back then, I used to have my bed up against a wall. So I guess subconsciously, in theory, I had one of my flanks covered, which is a joke because they go through the walls anyway, right? But anyway, I had my bed up against the wall. And when he punched his dresser in that split screen image I'm telling you about, it sounded as if he punched the wall that I was laying next to. Bang. I woke up. I immediately looked at the TV and it was just snow again. But I know what I just seen. I know what I just experienced. So there I was, like, kind of cowering, and it was a flashback, that mentality, that state of siege that I felt myself to be in. I go back to my childhood days where I could have the room fully illuminated, but there I am beneath a pile of like blankets, pillows. I'd have a mound above me and have a little air pocket, right? And then and then when the air started to grow stale, I'd lift up the blanket, get some air in. And I used to do things like set up booby traps. I mean, long before Home Alone. I mean, I would have yarn, I would have toys swing by on yarn, and because I felt like when I was a kid and I didn't have a context for it again, that I was being watched. I was, I had a creepy feeling in certain periods of my childhood. So fast forward back to that experience, my brother punches his dresser, bang. It sounds like he punches my wall. I wake up and I look at the TV screen. It's just snow again. Okay. So there I am, kind of cowering again, right? And the next morning, I go out to the living room, and my brother is sitting there, and he's glaring at me, and he's giving me these dirty looks. And I'm just coming and going to the fridge and just doing my normal morning routine. Finally, I have to ask him, dude, what's up? Why do you keep glaring at me like that, right? What did I do? At first, he was reluctant to talk, but then he said, follow me. So he took me to his bedroom, and he showed me the dent in his dresser. And I said, yeah, what's your point? He said, then he laid out this whole story about this ET looking at him out of the TV. And then in order to test his reality, he punched the dresser and left a dent in it, right? And I said, now, I didn't mention anything about what I'd experienced the night before. So I said, well, why are you mad at me? How does this experience cause you to have this animosity towards me? He didn't have an answer for that, right? So I just went back in my own room. Also, incidentally, my younger brother is figured in a lot of my UFO-related dreams too. And then a little further down the track, during that same 2-week time frame, I had a missing time experience. I dropped off my buddy after I promised I'd pick him up from work. And then I dropped him off at his house. He works swing shift. We worked in the same company for a while. So we would finish 10:30 at night. And then I dropped him off at his place. I hung around long enough to see the beginning of Jay Leno's monologue for The Tonight Show, right? And then got in my car, my 71 Plymouth Roadrunner. And then just as I'm making a left onto the street, and I only lived like about 400 or 500 yards, I'd make a left and I make a right, then I'm at my house, basically. So I'm just about to make a left at this 4-way intersection, and I look over to my right, and that's the last thing I remember. The next thing I remember was waking up abruptly, sitting in my car, parked perfectly in my front yard. And I'm always one of those kinds of guys, I don't know, call it OCD or anal or retentive or something, but I have to park my car perfectly. I'm one of those kinds of guys that, perfect spacing from tires to the curb, et cetera, et cetera. So there I was, parked perfectly in my front yard on the street. Immediately, when I came to, I looked across the street to this house on the corner where when we first moved to San Jose, the neighbors there actually had sheep penned inside that fence enclosure, right? So I looked directly across the street. Okay, that house where the sheep used to live, that's there. I look over to the right, that's my house. Okay, I'm back. But I knew something had happened because my body felt as if it was like made of lead. I could barely move. And I had these electric currents running through my body. And in the back of my mind, pushing its way to the forefront of my mind, something about UFOs, aliens, and I didn't even want to go there because, I had that TV experience. I had a close flyby of a UFO experience synchronistically, which I didn't get into, all leading up to this. So I knew something of a UFO-related nature had happened by that point, and I'm sitting there for a good 15 minutes, terrified. And I was starting to get sensation back in my body because my body, like I said, it felt like lead. Finally, I, summon up the courage to get out of the car. I get out of my car. I'm looking up into the sky. I'm walking backwards towards the front gate, right? And then long story short, I get into the house. I go to my bedroom. And because I was going through this skittish kind of phase, I had a lot of things plugged into a power stick. And then when I, would come home, I would just hit the power stick and everything would come on, the TV, the stereo. Because at that time I was oftentimes sleeping with the TV on, and that's why I had that TV experience, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So I go into my bedroom, stiff as a board. I hit the switch in the power stick. The room lights up, the TV turns on, and the stereo starts blasting out. And of all the songs, it starts blasting out. It blasts out "Lights Out" by UFO, right? Mm-hmm. Lights out in London. I go, oh, geez, So I go to sleep. And then a short while later, I won't go into it, would take up too much time, but I've talked about this in some of my previous interviews and podcasts. I had a full-blown waking consciousness experience when I woke up in my bedroom, and there were 3 reptilian grays there. They had the big black eye pieces, grayish, somewhat of a bluish tint, stocky. They were not skinny. They were not frail. They had kind of a blue vest on with some kind of symbol on. And instead of fingers and claws, they just had a long claw, right? Dr. Carla Turner called them chicken claws. They were reptilian grays. In fact, that exact type is mentioned in her book, Into the Fringe, when her friend Fred is getting regressed by Barbara Bartley. He has this experience with these reptilian grays, except they were wearing red suits. Right. The ones I saw were wearing blue vests. But anyway, so I come to, and I look down. I would look over to my right. What was odd was I had my TV sitting on a chair there before I went to bed. I know it was there, but I guess they moved it or something, because that reptilian gray was standing right where the TV should have been. And I look up at him, at his face, and I look down at his clawed hands, and I was like, oh, crap. And then there's one at the foot of the bed, and there's one over by the door. And long story short, I won't go into details. Things just kind of unraveled from there. I found myself up in a big ship. They laid me out on this table and proceeded to do what I call flexing exercises without even touching me. They were somehow made me do all these sit-ups and stomach crunchers. And at one point I was on my stomach, and my upper torso and my legs were bent so far back that the back of my head and my heels were actually touching. Okay. And by now I knew something was going on. I knew it was real. I knew I was in deep trouble. Right. And there was a being, who many people refer to as a doctor or the surgeon or whatever. And then there was these little smaller tannish, brownish beings kind of scurrying around. And in between grunts, I asked this being, what are you doing? Right. And it said, telepathically, we're taking your energy. And I had no idea what he meant. Okay. So long story short, that's what set me off on this, because there was no denying it. I'd had a series of experiences. I didn't even get into them all. And then what it did was it compelled me to sit with a pad of yellow legal paper and write down every single anomalous experience I had since childhood. And after several pages, I realized whatever this is, which I strongly believe at some level aliens are involved, right? Mm-hmm. It's been with me all my life. And as a way to regain control, I've always been something of a reader. So I started driving to East San Jose, to the East Ridge Mall, because they had a B. Dalton bookstore there. And I cleaned them out of every alien abduction related book they had. The Bud Hopkins books, Communion, which I saved for last because I didn't like the cover of it. The Betty and Drayson books, which were classics written by Ray Fowler. So that provided insight. And then eventually, despite all the activity in San Jose back then, I don't know about now, but back then from a research perspective, and I didn't know anybody anyway, from a research perspective, it was very much a backwater, right? The few researchers I knew in San Jose, they were very standoffish. They were very territorial. Oh, what do you want to talk to my abductees for, right? I just want to share experiences, just, trade horror stories, right?
Well,
please.
I was just going to say, I mean, things are a lot different now as far as, it's a lot more common talk than it used to be. So it's a lot easier to discuss this stuff now, and still, the main focus I really want to eventually get to is to help people understand the vastness of this, how it's just infiltrated all aspects of our society, all the way down to the individual, like your experiences, because I'm sure what you just shared is going to, other people are going to relate. It's not just you. It's not just me. This is happening. They're loose farming all of our energy. And, so I understand, like back then, obviously it wasn't as easy to talk about this stuff as it is probably now.
Yeah. And thank you for pointing that out. My mentor, Barbara Bartley, she pointed out decades ago that every single person on this planet in some way, shape, or form is impacted by the alien/reptilian presence. Absolutely every single person. And now we're seeing that in spades. because this rollout, these mass treatments, so-called, there's nothing remotely human about any of that. There's nothing remotely human about these restrictions, about the isolation, about the narcissistic abuse we're all being subjected to collectively. There's nothing remotely human about it. And so once I got on the research trail, and I eventually moved down to San Diego, which was a key event because I got away from the backwater of San Jose, became a member of the San Diego UFO Society, hooked up with E.V. Lorgan eventually. And then through long distance means, back then we spent a lot of time on the telephone. I became a close associate and colleague of Barbara Bartley. And she really helped me out. She was my spiritual mama. She took me under her wing. By that point, she'd already had 30 plus years of reptilian research under her belt, right? Just regressing hundreds of people. What the ETs do a lot of times is they set up screen layers. There's a screen for the abductee, then there's a screen for the hypnotic regressionist, right? And most regressionists dead end at the screen level, right, for them. And it's usually a generic CAN kind of abduction experience, medical procedures, et cetera, et cetera. Barbara had the means, because she was trained by a world-class hypnotic regressionist, to get below that, to where the real nitty-gritty is. And so I had independently come to the conclusion that, and I think we, at some level, we come with a soul level understanding, an over soul level understanding. Once we come to grips with this, and once we start to delve into it, this intuitive process unfolds. And I've always had this affinity, this kind of connection to books. And back then it was books that we were into, because there was really no internet. So I found myself guided at different times in my life to use bookstores, and I would just happen to find the gem that I needed to find, right? So while I'm in this process, I'm in the San Diego UFO Society. I'm networking finally with other alien abductees and other researchers. And immediately I was drawn to the reptilian aspect of it, because I talked to people that had reptilian experiences, and because of my deep interest in the deep black military aspects of this as well. We were getting a lot of reports out of the high desert of Southern California of people that were having not only hardcore reptilian experiences, but on occasion, sometimes more frequently, they would be kidnapped by deep black elements of the military, taken to a facility. Sometimes they were taken to like a corporate office suite in town somewhere, but often as not, they were taken to a facility either above ground or taken underground, and they would really work them over, stick them with needles and do all these other things to them. We called them military type cases back then. The term MILAB didn't exist.
Right.
We didn't know what else to call them. So I was already on that trail, finding out what was going on in the high desert of Southern California. There's a lot of the Antelope Valley is where the aerospace headquarters, if you will, is, where Lockheed and at the time Rockwell and a number of other aerospace corporations had huge underground facilities where they developed a lot of this alien technology. And so this is what I got into. And then synchronistically, through a series of synchronous events, I got reunited, if you will, with Barbara Bartley. And from there, my research just really took off.
Yeah, and you were just talking about more the physical aspect of abductions, but a lot of this is they're able to telepathically project their consciousness into one's mind and create screen memories and even make themselves appear as someone else. And you know that, I've heard you talk about that before, but I've experienced this. And I think we even see this on the world stage with some of our politicians, and, this term shape shifting. It's not necessarily that they're shape shifting, but they're tricking our mind, and we're perceiving them as a human when they're actually not. And then they have the reptilian, what do they call them? Imposter humans. They look no different than a human. And, besides the fact that you might see their eye every once in a while, like turn into a slit or whatever. So that's the deception is really what I want to get into, and how they're able to deceive us and manipulate us. And this is happening on all levels of our society.
Indeed. It's through a long term process of genetic hybridization. After the most recent series of celestially driven cataclysms, there was a much smaller surface population base that they had to deal with. So they began, the Reptilians, Draco, and other archontic ET groups began this process of hybridization, imbuing their DNA and their behaviors, characteristics, etc., into particular bloodlines. And within the context of some of these bloodlines at the time, this elite, if you will, the astronomer priesthood class emerged, which, created the laws, dished out the penalties and all that. And around the same time, we had the supplanting of symbol language, which speaks to us from a soul, oversoul level, to the alphabet language, which shunted us into the left brain. And with the alphabet language comes words, comes edicts, mandates, dogmas, and a priesthood to enforce all that, right? Mm-hmm. So that was a radical, abrupt change. And of course, around the same time, because these beings are so evil, right? The ones that are the controllers here, it was the eradication of the original feminine principle and the replacement with this harsh, misogynistic mentality, again, wielded by this priesthood. And we saw the extremes of that in the witch hunts, which lasted for hundreds of years, the Inquisition, et cetera, the simultaneous eradication over many centuries of First Nations traditional lore, the shamanic medicine man tradition, medicine woman tradition that was native to this planet, and also to some degree imported here from off-world by other ET groups. So they got rid of the old, and they didn't have as many people to have to deal with because so many of them were wiped out in these celestially driven cataclysms. They created these hybridized bloodlines. They imbued their onerous characteristics into these bloodlines of murderousness, rapaciousness, bloodlust, et cetera, et cetera.
Service to self.
Service to self, absolutely. And so they created, and in linear time terms, all this was in a blink of an eye. The plan was to, by allowing certain technologies to come into the possession of the deep black military aerospace community, many of the key members of which already were from the sub-Rosa hybridized bloodline anyway, right? All these fraternal orders of Freemasons and what have you. So many of them are already sprinkled throughout the surface and subsurface intelligence, military, political world. So when this technology began to come into possession of the Earthlings, if you will, obviously it was the same hybridized bloodlines that gained control of this technology. And perish the thought they would actually allow that technology to get out into wider circulation to benefit us. No, it's all about artificial scarcity. It's all about divisiveness, creating wars, et cetera, et cetera. So what they've done is all these onerous characteristics, behaviors, they've imbued that into their hybridized elites. They've filtered that down through the school system because they knew that, and again, it goes back to what Barbara Bartley says, everyone on planet Earth has been affected by this. So someone could be of pure heart, just a wonderful person to be around, but in their childhood and growing up, they're just surrounded by narcissistic, abusive reptilian hybrids that were in a chessboard cosmic fashion placed around them at key junctures in their life to knock them off course, destabilize them, neutralize them, destroy their lives, et cetera, et cetera. So, a lot of us have had to navigate through this obstacle course for a long time.
Right. Well, they intimidate. Please. I mean, like their goal is like to intimidate the star seeds, right? And then they get them lead them astray off their spiritual path. And eventually, like me and you, like that you be at the receiving end of these attacks, right? And they want you to throw in the towel essentially and just terminate your assignment here on Earth. And that's what we're seeing on the world stage right now. We're seeing this with amongst everybody. And it's not just like things are going wrong for you. This is all done by design.
Absolutely. And when they really have you in their crosshairs, you can have financial problems, you could have car problems, you could have employment problems, you could have, I mean, it just runs the gamut. It's what Barbie and Evie Morgan and I talked about, like this big time spiritual warfare attack, right? And all because you're on the hunt. You're on the hunt for truth. You're trying to find what your mission is here, because you know that at some level that we're here for some greater purpose. Every single one of us, not just us on this podcast, but everyone has the potential to make a profound impact in this. And so what they do is that they just surround us with all these narcissistic reptilian hybrids. I mean, I grew up around a bunch of pathological liars in my immediate family and in my extended family, my cousins. So people were lying to me from day one. And that benefited me, because after a while, it wasn't just that I tuned them out. Oh, here comes so-and-so, cousin so-and-so. What's he going to lie about today, right? But there's a vibe that comes along with that. There's a vibe, which I intuitively picked up on without even consciously realizing it. And then later, when I was in this field, I would pick up that vibe again and instantly. And I trust my still silent voice, because usually when it tells me that, well, whatever this person is peddling, whatever theories they're pushing, there's nothing in it for me. I'm not going to make a value judgment about them or the material. It's just that, I got to allocate my time and resources in other directions, right? So it's helped me to navigate, because the UFO community, especially in the early 90s when I first became an active member, and it was what you were talking about a moment ago of how they strive to knock us off our true path. The New Age is one of those traps where they would like nothing more than people like us to be just, blissing out and just tuning all this stuff out because it's too negative, and we're just going to visualize a never-ending champagne cruise in the fifth dimension, right? That's what they want us to do. That's how they neutralize us. Right. But some of us are a bit more stubborn, right? So, getting back to my story and how it fits in, eventually what we found out was not only did myself and others that I networked with, not only in Southern California, but around the U.S., not only did we find out that, yes, the reptilians are key players behind this, as well as the mantis beings. What's starting to come out now, but what myself and some of my colleagues have known for some time, is that these octopus beings, too, are key players in this. They're not just ectoplasmic interdimensional, although they have that capability. Like the reptilians and some of the other beings, they're masters of density and frequency. They can alter their density at will.
Extremely intelligent, too.
Extremely intelligent, even in earthly terms. Yeah. The octopus are extremely intelligent, but in cosmic, galactic, and beyond terms, and these are quite large octopi that are in these enclosures.
Do you remember that story in Antarctica where the group of scientists encountered an octopus like that? And
no, I want to know that story. If you can find a link.
Aaron, do you know what I'm talking about? They encountered like an extremely intelligent octopus diving somewhere in Antarctica, and I don't. Really? I'm not going to do the story any justice right now, but yeah, they encountered something that what they would basically describe as an ET.
Yeah. Like Barbara Bartley had worked with a guy named Riley Martin, a black guy, very sharp, and you can see in the series of videos that Barbie did with Riley, and that's what Barbie's style was. She would videotape the abductee, let them describe in their own words what they experienced, what their perceptions of it were, what they gleaned from these experiences. It was a very powerful technique. In her infrequent lectures, she would just play these videos of different abductees, and then in between the videos, she would do a commentary, right? It was very powerful because you can tell that these people were not coached by Barbie what to say. These are people that have seen and experienced what they're describing. And you mentioned a key point earlier. It's not just physical experiences. These alien abductions, they occur all across the board, astrally, stage managed dreams, psychically. It's not just the stereotypical medical procedures that are done to people. It's much more than that.
Right.
And a lot of it can happen in your own bedroom at night. You don't have to be taken up into a ship, right? Or conversely, they can just pull you through a portal and then you're either underground or in some other dimension. So it varies. So Barbie was working with a guy named Riley Martin, just to make a quick point. And he was on board a very large ship, which he estimated to be about 15 miles long. I don't know how he came up with that estimate. Maybe he was told that by some of the ETs. But in one part of the ship, inside of a huge enclosure, was this very large octopus being. And since that time, I saw that video in the 90s. I've spoken to a few other people who've likewise been taken on to big space stations and likewise have seen these huge octopus beings. But these octopus beings can scale themselves up or down. People have seen them, smaller versions of them interdimensionally, even coming out of TVs and coming out of PC monitors and what have you. Anyway,
right.
I'm going to say something.
Right. I mean, our reality is nothing what we think it is, but yeah, if you don't have an awareness of what you're talking about right now and things are happening to you, like Dickie said, they can project screen memories and all the above, that can really fuck with you and drive you to insanity, honestly. So it's important to realize that what they're capable of as far as that goes, because it was tripping me out for years. But then once you're aware of it, you can actually you realize there's tools and you can actually defend yourself and protect yourself. And it doesn't have to be like that. Although they're very smart and they adapt and they're clever and they'll find a way in if you're not constantly aware, especially doing this type of work.
Yes, absolutely. When they become aware that we are on the search for truth, we're on the quest, we will go through periods of our life when we're subjected to a lot of spiritual warfare reprisals all across the board. Almost nightly at times, we'll be astrally abducted, we'll be messed with in some fashion. We'll wake up in the morning with marks and bruises and puncture holes. But all we can do is just keep marching on. That's all we can do.
Right.
After a while, what happens, not saying that we're out of the woods yet, but what happens is, just like any other bully, they look for easier prey, is what they do. It's, they try a lot of these things on us. And then when the fear and intimidation doesn't have the kind of impact on us that they would like, they'll just find easier prey. And in my case, they used to do a lot of stage managed dreams where they would send these characters into my dreamscape, which I knew were reptilians.
Oh my, the same exact thing happens to me. Go ahead.
Yep.
But they would be humans. Like, for example, in this one experience I had, right? I was in your stereotypical kitchenette at a work site, right? Small space, a phone on the wall, old school phone on the wall, table, kitchen stuff there, little fridges. And then I'm in there, and then these three guys show up. Now they all look identical. Sometimes their screens aren't too effective. They look like identical Filipino guys, except one was taller than the other. Now this happens with the reptilians sometimes, where you either see them in an experience and they look like reptilians, or they look like fake humans. But sometimes the alpha, if you will, or at any rate a taller one than the others, is there and seems to be the boss. So again, in this dreamscape, stage managed dreamscape scenario, I'm in this little kitchenette at a work site, and then they had the corniest outfits. They had these like brown outfits, brown shirts with like kind of a yellow diagonal. It reminded me of the terrible looking San Diego Padres uniforms back in the day, right? And the brown pants, and they all look identical except one was taller than the other. And the one had this like grimace of rage at me all the time, just shooting evil at me through its eyes. And I knew immediately what they were. They were reptilians pretending to be humans, and just to rub it in, they kind of make themselves look Filipino, right? So I pick up the phone and I dial and I call up Barbara Bartley, and I go, "Oh yeah, I got these three dickheads here, and I'm at work, and they're reptilians, and I know they're reptilians, right?" And because I'm talking to Barbie, or I think I'm talking to Barbie, the lead one, the taller one, starts to get really enraged, and he starts making these threatening actions towards me. Now, at the time, this is important, At the time, I was living in a little studio apartment in San Diego. I mean, small. I could be sitting in a toilet and cooking breakfast. That's how small this place was, right? And my bed was right up against this large bay window, right? And then down below is the terrace, the deck for the unit below, right? And so here I am laying in bed in this astral dreamscape manipulation. And I'm on the phone and I'm getting irritated. I'm talking to Barbara Bartley. And then this entity is just messing with me, getting in my face. Finally, he pisses me off so bad, I lunge at him. And then in real life, I'm crashing into that bay window. And fortunately, I didn't fall. Fortunately, I didn't fall through it. See, that was the trick. It was trying to bait me, right, into like lunging for it. I did. I fell for it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the glass held. Otherwise, crash, I would have been cut to ribbons, fallen down to the bottom, and who knows what would have happened. So I bounced off of it, fortunately. Yeah. And then I woke up and I go, oh, those fuckers, you know.
Sometimes I wonder, like, I would love to have had a camera in place, because I've experienced the same thing where your physical body, you're fighting this thing in the astral realm or the dream state, and then it manifests into the physical and upon a waking state. And a lot of times it's you breaking free from some sort of paralysis or whatever it might be. But sometimes I'll wake up lashing and covers are flying and my dog's, who knows what's going on. But yeah, it's, it's interesting to think about too, is this isn't just like they don't look for immediate results. Like they plan everything out. Everything's very well planned out to guarantee their success, not just individually, but across the board for everybody. They don't care about the immediate results. This is a big master plan. And that's what we're trying to expose.
Yes. And from an alien abduction perspective and moving out, expanding out to all of society, all of civilization, what they do, what I've come to understand about the reptilians and some of their cosmic vassals, some of the gray factions that work for them, work in alliance with them at some level. What they seem to do is modify our behavior in certain ways. Mm-hmm. And, not casting any value judgments on anyone and their lifestyle choices. But it can run the gamut from changing the, let's say, the sexual orientation of people on the one hand, but also making them more impulsive, making them more violent, making them more rage-filled, or conversely, making them very timid and passive and what have you, turning them into doormats, turning them into, people pleasers, right? Like to give an example, when I was a boy, I would climb anything, right? And then when I was in my teenage years, when I was having a lot of alien abduction experiences, but didn't understand it at the time, I kept having these dreams where I was stuck on like a sheer cliff face, right? No footholds, no handholds. I'm just stuck there. And then the only way to break out of that was the way my simple mind worked was, just jump, get it over with. Mm-hmm. So I would jump, make myself wake up from the terror of falling. And then before too long, I had a fear of heights, go figure, because this happened repetitively. Right? Yeah. And then what happened also was they did an overlay on that. This is how they get people, turn them into arachnophobes. And it took me a while to get over that, right? Where I just kept having dreams of big spiders all over the place and spiders coming around me. And it turned out later, much later in our work that, well, yes, there are these weird spider bot thingies that not only seem to be, yes, not only do they seem to be, there seems to be like an AI variant, if you will, but there also seems to be an interdimensional real kind of critter or critters that are spider-like in appearance. I had Kim Russell on my show, and she talked about it as a little girl. These things would, come into her bedroom. They would be crawling onto her bed, and she'd scream and turn the lights on, and they would be gone, right? And then
Aaron,
turn the lights off.
You woke up to those before, Aaron, right?
Multiple times I've seen those. Yep.
Yeah.
Always when I'm waking up is when I see them. Yeah.
And it was right when we're waking up that if they want us to forget about a particular experience, then they could eroticize our dreams, manipulate us to trigger the sexual arousal mechanism. So we lay there fantasizing about some hottie for a moment, just a moment, but that's enough to make us forget about what we just woken up from. When we're clinging on to that last vestige of the experience. Yeah, I know I had an experience. I was on a craft or I was in a warehouse and something was going on. Oh, hot chick. right? Suddenly you forget all that stuff. That's a manipulation. And people need to realize that that's how they work on us at the emotional, psychic, psychological level. The whole psychology field was created by reptilian hybrids mucking with our heads, right? Look what it is now. So, getting back to the dream manipulation, then I found myself in dreams where I'd be stuck in a sheer cliff face, and here are these big spiders crawling towards me on the cliff. Okay, so they're combining this stuff, and I jump off again. So developed arachnophobia, develop a fear of heights, and they can do this with clowns. Terrorize people with clowns in their dreams. I mean, I had this one experience. I don't know if it was more ET related or kind of. I'm thinking it's more military mind control related, where I had this horrible astral dreamscape virtual environment experience where this balloon clown was coming after me. And like when you rub two balloons together, it makes that squeaky kind of squealy kind of noise, right? So here I am, and it's one of those things you were just talking about where you're lashing out, you're pushing on them, and all this changes our behavior in subtle and not so subtle ways. If we don't have a conceptual framework and realize the pattern that's going on, we could fall into certain predetermined behavioral categories that they want to put us in, and they will try. We're going to turn this guy into a pedophile. If that doesn't work, we're going to turn him into this. If that doesn't work, we're going to try this. And eventually, if you fight all that stuff off, like I said, they'll go, look for weaker prey.
Yeah, right? And they control people through their vices also. Whatever,
big time.
Alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, whatever.
Self-medication is a big part of this.
Yeah, once they get somebody addicted to something like that, it's unfortunately game over for them unless they can come back.
Yes, and also especially, and Barbara Bartley was on this decades ago, the crank aspect of it, where they get people hooked on crystal meth or derivatives such as commonly known as crank in California and in the Midwest, because that's a big time doorway to open. Right. Because what it does, it lowers their frequency bandwidth into the happy hunting ground of all these entities. They just jump into people and take them over. And so anyway, a lot of it is behavior modification. You often hear researchers say, well, they're studying our emotions. Well, what do they really mean by that? What Barbara Bartley found out in the course of her investigations is, and I experienced this personally, they traumatize the hell out of us, where it could be from anything from pitting children to make them fight against one another, to turn one or more into a bully or make them, an aggressive child. What Barbie called years ago, and look what's happened now with the cultural Marxism and critical race theory, everything else. What Barbie called decades ago, the breed out the love agenda, just to breed love out of people genetically and through psychological indoctrination, just turn them into spiteful kind of.
Thank you for bringing that up, because the love aspect of it. Actually, the latest Matrix movie, which not a lot of people were a fan of, but I actually found it pretty intriguing. Actually, knowing what we know, there's tons of disclosure in it, and that at the very end, the guy is like, he might as well be in a reptilian, talking to them and telling them how. They've basically programmed people away from love to where they don't even want true love. They don't even want that passion and that connection and that union anymore, because they've been so programmed away from it that it's just, even if it was laid out in front of them, it's just like unappealing to them, because we've been so programmed to go for the superficial aspects of reality and the materialistic aspects. And then obviously they're always manipulating us sexually, and that's one of the main ways that they do it, that they control us.
The vapid, vacuous, just don't give a rip mentality that I'm not picking any particular group, but exemplified in many cases by so-called millennials, but also people well into their 40s and 50s. If they've had this communist, socialist, Luciferian bent to them, and a lot of it has to do with the indoctrination too. They're just surrounded by all these teachers, counselors, administrators that are basically reptilian human hybrids that are spouting the Marxist communist creed, right? And what happened was, just to look at it from a geopolitical perspective, a lot of people became tolerant. People don't really understand the McCarthy years for what they were. McCarthy, if there was anyone, we hear a term bandied about a lot these days, controlled opposition. And a lot of people don't really know what that means. I take the good with the bad. Okay, people are accusing such and such of being a controlled opposition. Well, that's all well and good. But is it causing some people to be red-pilled? Well, if it is, I take the good with the bad. I don't care if he's controlled.
Yeah.
And they don't understand also how celebrities and burgeoning and soon-to-be celebrities of one sort or another in the sports world or whatever, they take all these pictures of them, and those celebrities have no idea the editing that's going to take place, where they're going to shade one side of their face. Ooh, look, the black and white, dark, light aspect. Ooh, look at the thing what he's doing with his hands, and he's covering his eye with, with one hand. And did the guy really do that during the photo shoot? We don't know. Clever editing, suddenly it splashed all over the media. Oh, look, this person was a shill all along. Well, maybe not. Okay. See, people aren't really thinking on an intuitive level. But anyway, getting back to the point I was going to make, the cultural Marxism it was such, which itself is a reptilian, self-hating, outward projection agenda. It was designed to trigger that R complex mentality within people, the victim identity politics, make them like lash out at all these institutions. And the rage is always directed. It's always directed at, white people. It's directed at this. It's directed at, anything to do with American traditions, right? Because you have all these people that are being manipulated at different levels. And it's all cult abuse. What will you find when one studies the behaviors of a lot of these hardcore serial killers? They were really steeped into the occult. They're really steeped in the devil worship, really steeped in the ritualism. Well, in varying degrees, that has been shoved down the throats of people from childhood on up through all these schools and indoctrination, what have you. And so it's moving us away from the love aspect, getting us into the egocentric, self-centered, project all this unrequited, unresolved rage issues out syndrome. And also the androgyny aspect, the gender dysphoria, as they're calling it now, aspect, which is, the Baphomet agenda, essentially. I remember years ago when I was in San Jose, and I was at the financial district, La Jolla, very ritzy area. That's where all the banking institutions and a lot of the corporations are. And I was at this reflecting pool for Science Applications International Corporation. It's an infamous contractor for the Defense Department, intelligence community. Anyway, they had two statues there. One of them was an oversized statue of a guy in biblical garb, the staff, the shepherd's outfit, et cetera, and the plaque read, "The Old Man." And over to the side was another big oversized statue, and it said "The New Man," and similar biblical garb, except they didn't have the hood on. The individual was bald, and it was androgynous. You couldn't tell if it was a male or a female, right? So the old man, the new man, and the new man is androgynous. You can't tell if it's a male or a female. And that's one step below, one rung below this whole transhumanist, turn everyone into a bot kind of syndrome, which is what we see now. We see so many people just plugged into their digital devices. And again, it goes back to this alien reptilian agenda of plugging us into this hive consciousness. Now, they operate on a hive consciousness, but the thing about these ETs and these interdimensional negative beings is they can access the information field. They can access memories that we have, which we're not even consciously aware of, and make us relive. Like, for example, if they're going to, if a reptilian in our example is raping a woman, and this woman, which they know has had childhood sexual abuse, because they would be plugged in at a genetic information field level with the reptilian hybrid who abused her when she was a young girl. So not only would they be able to plug into the information field and force her to relive those memories in real life while they're raping her, but they can, all that blocked traumatic energy, which was never successfully released through years of therapy and what have you, it's still there to be accessed. So they just draw it out. You talked earlier when we started about this looshing aspect. This is what Barbie called big time energetic emotional harvesting. And what do we see now with these social justice warriors? It's the pod person point and shriek. That person's not wearing a mask. Whoa! That's what we have now. The reason, the logic, the love, the empathy, the compassion, that's all done. That's all been kicked to the curb. The narcissistic abuse meted out on a moment by moment basis by the corporate media and all these authority figures. That's all reptilian narcissistic abuse. It's like we've allowed into our personal space all these narcissistic reptilian abusers. And what's a hallmark of narcissistic abusers? They lie in our face. They do something in front of you, and then they lie about it. Right?
Well, yeah, and go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, please. I just wanted to make that point.
It's true because, that's what, like I've said this before. What does a narcissist do? They rewrite history to avoid accountability. So they're even trying to lie about our history at this point. So we don't actually know who we are, where we came from. They've came in and erased the true human history a long time ago. And like you said earlier, it's all about altering the gene pool. They go in and alter the gene pool of a lesser evolved civilization so they can control us from afar. And basically we're all just puppets, and even the politicians and some of these celebrities and stuff, they're puppets too. And some of them don't even know that they're being controlled. And then there's a whole soul scalping aspect to that too, which I'd like to get into, but I'll let you comment on that.
Yeah, because that is a key aspect of it, because the soul and the mind and the oversoul and the information field are inextricably linked. And look what they're doing with these treatments. They're essentially cutting people off from that source, of lack of a better term, right? Yeah. They're being plugged into this Borg hive collective where the potential exists after people shed the mortal coil from dying from these treatments. That's, the fun and games ain't over. They could be plugged into this eternal Tron-like existence for potentially forever. We just don't know how deep the rabbit hole goes as far as this AI nanobot technology is concerned. But getting back to the behavior modification, which is a key aspect, because what they've done is they've imbued their genetics and their behaviors, and also reinforced through ritual of one kind or another. Ritual through government. Government is one of the biggest ritual pushers there are. You go to a government website, you don't click enter, you click submit, right? Here in Australia, it's like when somebody sends in like evidence to a court, or they send in, a request for information to some government bodies. It's a submission. Submission. Jordan Maxwell talked about the power of language, and others throughout the years have talked about the power of language and symbology, Manly Hall, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that reinforces the underlying genetic programming, and it's manipulation, not on just a genetic level, but a spiritual level, because a lot of these people, they are reptilian human hybrids. And I'm just focusing on the reptilian human hybrids here for a moment. So there's not only a genetic compatibility, but indeed there's a spiritual compatibility. There's a frequency compatibility. By imbuing so much reptilian genetics, if you will, into somebody, it radically changes the neurology, the brains of these people. And I think we all have receptors. Well, we know that there are like DMT receptors, THC receptors. For whatever reason, they're already in there in our brain, right? Go figure. But I think at some level, there are receptors, for lack of a better term, that allow these archontic entities to plug right into our brains, right into our minds. If our astral dreamscape stage managed dreams are any indication, they can do this, right? And whether they choose to eroticize our dreams, whether they choose to horrify our dreams, whatever the case may be, they have the means to plug into it. And what happens is, if a person has enough of these genetics in them, it allows these reptilians that have the ability to alter their frequency and density to enter into us at various times in our sleep. And sometimes if people aren't aware of this process, what happens is what I call an interface takes place, where eventually the entity, the interdimensional reptilian entity, successfully implants itself, for lack of a better term, into the host human, and is actually driving the ship.
It's like a parasite.
It's absolutely a parasite. The metaphor of Stargate SG-1 was a great example, where these snake-like aliens burrow into the necks of people and take them over. Well, essentially that's what's going on. And there actually are these snake-like interdimensional entities that take up people as hosts. But anyway, so these entities take people over, turn them into hosts for themselves. And since the institutions, the whole system has been geared up for this type of control, surprise, surprise, so many of these hosted people become supervisors, they become managers, or they just become irritants. They're thrown into our lives at key junctures, and I'm all for self-accountability and self-responsibility, but it doesn't help when all these hosty people are around us, at times leading us astray, right? In the guise of friendship or whatever the case may be. So, and a lot of it is that narcissistic abuse where we're just confronted with nothing but lies. And then for people that have been beaten down, because we come, all of us, from a shame-based upbringing, right? We have this wounded inner child, and I'm a work in progress. We have to work out all these issues so we don't act out in some way that negatively impacts us in the future, where we're a people pleaser, we can't say no, and it just causes all kinds of problems for us, to cite but one example, okay? So these entities are constantly trying to categorize or slot us into certain categories for their manipulative purposes. And as time goes on, we begin to see, and especially now more than ever, because of this treatment rollout, those people that haven't succumbed to them yet, we see the pod person replacement aspect, the Borg aspect, now more than ever. It was leading up to that with the social justice warrior programming, and we were seeing the schisms in society where they're deliberately trying to create these artificial divisions within society. But now we're seeing the consciousness and I do believe I've talked about this in recent podcasts and in interviews with Jerry Marzinski. And if you haven't had Jerry on the show, I could set it up. The guy's brilliant.
Yeah, please do. Yeah,
absolutely.
Because there's absolutely no doubt in my mind and in Jerry's mind that there is a linkage between the intrusive thoughts and the voices and the entities behind the voices and these treatments. Because these voices speak to us in our own thought voice. We think it's our thought voice because it sounds like our thought voice, but they're not. Right?
Yes.
Especially if there's an OCD aspect to it. And especially if these thoughts lead to bad behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. Well, these thoughts are constantly goading people to take the treatments, to get themselves tested and what have you. And then once they go down that road, they just find themselves in a deep spell situation. And so that's what we're finding. There's been a clear division now between people like us. I don't say this in an elitist sense, and like everyone else who's still like enmeshed in this pod person matrix.
It's a spell, like you said. It's black magic, and I know somebody specifically who's a starseed, and she woke up one day with the thoughts like she found herself like in her own voice, like saying, "I need to go get the vaccine," and she was like, "Wait, this isn't." She knew. She goes, "Oh, I see what you guys are doing," and she was powerful enough to just cast that away. Which is where we all want to get to a place. Like when they try and attack me now, I'm just like, nice try, and they're clever. And sometimes, like even last night, they tried messing with me, and I was almost expecting it because we were going to record this today, but you just gotta get above it. And like you said, they'll go bully someone else. And unfortunately, like it's still trying to figure out like how to stop it completely, but it's not that easy.
Yeah, I'm still trying to work it out. Fortunately, right. I work with world-class healers in the true shamanistic sense, where what they do is they yank out all the energetic plugins to us, and they detach all these entities that try to attach to our auric fields. I mean, this is what medicine men, women, shamans have been doing, from time immemorial, and they've carried on that tradition in their own way. So, I have a friend, Leonie David. I'm going to have her on the show. She's pretty booked up for a while, but she could be a tremendous help. I went through a spate last year, 4 nights in a row. I've always been kind of an insomniac. I'm not going to blame aliens on this, but I think that at some level, I think that they had a role. And the astral abductions were so blatant. Even as I'm laying there trying to sleep and not even asleep yet, they were already taking me out of my body. 4 nights in a row. And to those listening and watching, it could vary. You could feel yourself being pulled out of the top of your head, pulled out of your chest, pulled out of the soles of your feet. At any rate, they're astrally abducting me. 4 nights in a row, and I'd have to fight and battle and get back into my body. So I asked Leonie David to help me, and she did. And I haven't, knock on wood, I haven't had that problem since, right? But
Right.
you know, I never have I gone through 4 nights in a row where they didn't even bother to wait for me to fall asleep. You know,
Mhm.
to whoever they were like,
Well, you can never have enough tools under your belt as far as this stuff goes. And I want to get into how this is affecting, our leaders, the elites, the politicians, and the soul scalping aspect, because that's interesting to me. I've heard that they have the technology to essentially, literally, basically rob someone of their soul, scalp their soul, and put it in a pod, for lack of a better term. And that soul is trapped in a pod, and it lives out the illusion of a life in some sort of a matrix. Okay, so now their soul, they've taken, let's just say Joe Biden's soul, and put it in a pod, and it's living out an illusionary life in some matrix somewhere. They then project a reptilian consciousness into his body, and they take control of the host, and they can, and it's not just one, they can, in and out all the time. There's different.
yes, sometimes people are hosted by numerous entities, not just one. Yes.
Right. And yeah, so they're just replaced by like a reptilian entity. Yeah. And this is happening with our world leaders, military, politicians, elites, all the above. And this is, I think, what we're seeing. So sometimes it's not necessarily a reptilian, but it's a reptilian consciousness in these people. And it's unfortunately they were once human, but probably blackmailed out of their normal existence and pushed into a position, if not born into it and groomed that way via MK Ultra, mind control, all the above. And obviously the chemtrails and all that stuff plays a huge part in it. That's part of the spell, is some of those gases that they release just completely mask their own ships and their own craft and everything else. It's there clear as day, but we can't see it because of the gases we're being deceived with.
Absolutely. The geoengineering, the aerosol agenda.
Right.
I'm absolute. It's not a question of me being believer. I mean, you know, I leave it to everyone else to make their own decisions about these things, but I'm absolutely certain on numerous occasions I've seen, for lack of a better term, the second sun. People call it Nibiru. People call it, you know, what they will, the red dwarf, the brown dwarf, et cetera, et cetera. I've seen it with my own eyes, and I've seen the efforts that they've made to conceal it with the chem spraying and the chem clouds, right? So, and there's no telling, it's already having an impact on this planet, seismically, volcanically, et cetera, which they're all just labeling climate change, of course.
Yeah.
And there's no telling if that mini solar system is inhabited by one or more, advanced civilizations, right? So we're at that stage now where it just happens to cycle back at this point in time. I think it's part of the reason why they're chemtrailing everything, this perma-chemtrail haze we see above us. But all of that, what it does is they've terraformed this planet to such an extent that it would be unrecognizable to our ancient ancestors. They just look around and say, what the hell is going on here? Right? Mm-hmm. The food is unnatural. Ants don't even want anything to do with some of the stuff that we call food. That's how bad it's gotten. And so what we have is a closed system. And what we have is this subject population. Barbara Bartley used to always say, most people simply don't have the neural circuitry to understand any of this. And she didn't say it in an elitist fashion. It was out of sadness and regret, really. And I know what she meant by that, because it's a process of, and again, I don't mean to sound elitist when I say this, I'm calling it as I see it. There's been a genetic de-evolution process at work where the people have been so shame-based through all this trauma, through all this abuse, and some of it goes back many lifetimes. And neurologically, they've been affected in such a way that they're more reptilian-brained, they're more reptilian orientation minded, if you will, than they are human minded. So they're more prone to be emotional, they're more prone to lash out, more prone to be impulsive. And we know through studies of serial killers that they lack a frontal lobe capacity, which is our impulse control net. And so what they've done is not only have they eroded through various means, genetics and otherwise, genetic engineering and otherwise, the frontal lobe impulse control capability. But they've also done something to the higher cognitive functioning capability of humans, as well as the intuitive connection, the intuitive process. A lot of that has to do with the alphabet language, and then just all the dogma and the brainwashing that's gone on since then. So, yeah, please.
And if we allow them to inject something directly into us, that can strongly affect the intuitive aspect of the human. And that's exactly what it's doing. It has nothing to do with this agenda. I don't even call it a pandemic. I call it agenda, an agenda.
Well, it has everything to do with the soul shearing, the soul aspect you were talking about. And they don't even need to capture a whole soul. They could just, a shard of it, if you will, right?
Right.
Because they have the means. And in one of Barbara Bartley's key cases, along with Dr. Carla Turner, they worked with Ted Rice. And as a boy, you're probably familiar with the story, but any of your listeners aren't familiar with it, I'll give a quick rundown. They abducted Ted Rice as a boy, and then they took him on board this big ship, and they hooked him up. They put all these wires onto him and connected him to a black box. They gave him something to drink, which basically killed him, ejected his soul consciousness matrix, which was then sucked into this black box, right? That black box, or something like it, similar to it, comes up again and again in a lot of these abduction, even my lab experiences, right? So anyway, Ted Rice's childhood body is officially, his consciousness is now inside this box, and then he's able to see this because his consciousness can see outside of the box. They wheel in on some kind of a gurney, essentially a clone of his, right? An identical copy of his own childhood body. They hook up all these wires from the black box to the clone body, give him a jolt, and next thing you know, he's in his new body.
Yep.
And they take him out to what Barbie called the assemblies. An assembly is that scene, the Parliament scene in Star Wars, where there's all these different ETs, all these different species there in some big, confab kind of thing. And then what they did, one of the ETs did, was it held Ted Rice in his new clone body up triumphantly, and all these ETs were cheering and stuff, right? And then they sent him back, and then
like a trophy.
And his family was searching for him. This was in Alabama, where he grew up, if memory serves. His family, his extended family, cousins and uncles and aunts, they were searching for him in the woods because missing time. He was physically gone. Then they saw this whirlwind kind of thing with lights emanating out of it, come out of the sky, touch down, depart, and in its wake, it left young Ted Rice there. Ted Rice then had like a major heat temperature problem. He was warm to the touch, hot to the touch. So they immersed him into a bathtub and covered him with ice to bring his body temperature down. Long story short, a lot of those childhood illnesses you're only supposed to get once, i.e. like chickenpox and measles, he got them again because that wasn't his original body. So the point of relevance is, yes, they can, and everyone who's gone through an astral abduction knows this. They can take your consciousness for whatever length of time and temporarily detain it. And I think that at a cosmic level, they've done this to countless souls, not just humans or humans on other worlds, but to different ETs. What they've done, it's like a currency for them. It's like almost like Bitcoin in a way, where they can utilize these, trade in these. And I think that part of the agenda that we're just talking about with this mass treatment rollout has to do at some level with what we call the soul.
Yeah. Well, and something to note is that the reason they have to do this is because the soul can't be killed. The soul is a fragment of source. So they can't kill us. They can't kill the soul, but they can certainly manipulate it and trap it and do whatever they can. And it's obviously, we're talking about all this doom and gloom, but there is a way out. They programmed us to be this dualistic society, right? But if you can shed that dualistic nature and just rise above that and, start doing the inner work, it's just cliche, but that's honestly what it's going to take, and defeating the enemy within, because we're always in a battle with ourselves. And a lot of times, we're the only thing in our own way. We're the only thing that's stopping us from progressing. So anything you could do to heal your traumas and your wounds and your weaknesses, and basically recalibrate yourself, you can rise above this, and you don't have to be quite as susceptible as the rest of the world, because you're aware now, and you have the tools. And once you're aware, they can't control you anymore. They can try, and they're going to try, but you adapt. We adapt. That's what's beautiful about us.
Well, the shadow work, as some refer to it, is the toughest work to do, because we have to confront ourselves, all of our weaknesses, all of our vulnerabilities, all of our preconceived biases. And a lot of it has to do with impulse control, right? What triggers us to behave in certain ways? Also, what can potentially, and I went through periods of this, what can put us into a very compliant state? I went through a period of extreme suggestibility. At one point when I was living in San Diego for about 2 weeks, I couldn't say no to anyone. And imagine the chaos it caused my life, right? Like I'm going into a car wash. I just want the basic car wash. But they come around, upsell me. You want to get the special or just a little bit more? Yeah, go for it, right? And what was the special? They put this, air freshener thing shaped like a tree on my rearview mirror. That was pretty much it. And they wiped down my, console.
Yeah.
I paid like $10 more for that. But the point being is that I was in a suggestible state where I was so compliant, so submissive, so weak. And what we see now with this psychological warfare abuse going on society-wide, this abusive government / daddy figure has taken on the role of the authoritarian, stern disciplinarian daddy. And so many of these people, because of whatever unresolved issues that they still haven't worked out, because of their own childhood issues, and because of their people-pleasing behavior, they gravitate towards that. Oh, they want to protect us. They want to save us. And it empowers them in a strange way. So they're almost deputized in a way. So they turn into mask holes. They turn into vax holes. They turn into Karens, so-called. And they become a force multiplier for the system.
Yeah.
Because they're playing consciously and subconsciously simultaneously both the victim identity card and also the hero-heroine card. At some level, you look at these masked up people, even in places that don't even require a mask anymore, they still wear them.
Thank you. We don't have to wear a mask here anymore. It's recommended, but 80 to 90% of people are willingly wearing them. Still, it blows my mind. I'm like, you don't have to wear it. Like,
they think it's protecting them.
Yeah, it's a hive consciousness thing. It's more than just virtue signaling. It's in a very weird, twisted way. They see themselves as like Brad Pitt in World War Z or Will Smith in I Am Legend. It's like, we're in this together. This is for the community. We got to.
Right. Well, they're led to believe that they're like a stand-up citizen. They're doing something right. And and then at the same time, you see like these orchestras playing their flute through the mask with a hole cut in it. I'm like, where is this is somebody who's no longer thinking for themselves,
Well, that's a hallmark of narcissistic abuse, where the insanity becomes the norm. It's like what I always say about these narcissistic abusers is, and I say to them, don't push your insanity on me, right? And that's what they're doing with this whole rollout is like, I'm not part of your cult. Don't push your cult crap on me, because that's what this is all about is dogma, cult abuse and cult acquiescence. And, I don't play that game, basically. So a lot of this has led of this long-term genetic engineering behavior modification to this point we're at now. And the point you made about how we can get ourselves out of this, navigate out of this, the shadow work is a big part of this. I'm a work in progress. I wouldn't, make any claims that being anything other than a work in progress.
Right.
It takes a lot of work. We come from a shame-based background, and that's what makes it more difficult, right? We have to own up to a lot of crap, a lot of stuff that we've done. It's interesting that we're on this subject because I've been reading the autobiography of Slash, the guitarist for Guns N' Roses, and you talk about our contic manipulated life, and somehow he always landed on his feet. And I see that at some level with all of us. Like, despite some of my, worst behaviors, some of the worst choices I've ever made, somehow, my long-suffering spirit guides, I don't know what the details are, but somehow I can navigate around that. And there's an internal compass that we have that if we listen to that still small voice, we can navigate around a lot of this crap. Now, what they're doing, a hallmark of a prison society, is they just remove your privileges. You have fewer and fewer options, right? But still, we can still create that bubble of serenity around us, where no matter what kind of crap they hurl at us, it ain't going to stick because we're not part of their cult. And I believe that, with the power of the internet, with the power of the shows that we're doing, we're reaching out and in our own way, we're encouraging and empowering others, because sometimes all people need is that belief and that encouragement. Like Barbara Bartley did that for me. I mean, she believed in me before I believed in myself. I was a big time shame-based individual when I first met her, but she really bucked up my spirits, really encouraged me, took me under her wing. And I always make a point nowadays to, pay that forward in some way, because there's a lot of people out there that are hurting and they're on the path to reintegration and recovery, but they've got an important story to tell too. And they just have to believe in themselves enough to be willing to share.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. One last topic before we wrap this up. I feel like we could do 10 of these episodes. There's so much to talk about. I mean, it's literally. And
I'd love to have you guys on my show too, just to interject briefly, but please come on my show and just let it rip, whatever you want to talk about.
Right. No. Yeah, we'd love to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the reptilians themselves. So we have reptilians. There's so many different species of them. They come from different places. Even like I've heard Freemasonry, the Masonic symbol, Masonic symbolism actually stems or originates on a reptilian home planet, and it was brought here. It's not something that humans conjured up, But I've heard there's so many different species of them. I've heard there's like the term reptarian, which is like a reptilian that has evolved. It was born and evolved on Earth. They didn't come here. I just found that interesting. But what are your thoughts on a benevolent reptilian race? Because through my research, I've heard they're born into this society. The reptilians are even born into this as children. They don't have a choice. And even some of them on some level on their planet, or even here on Earth, are going through their own awakening, and they escape their system. And then they specifically, sometimes people channel them and they ask to not be judged by their race, but their individuality. Are you familiar with any concepts of benevolent reptilians? Because some people don't think they exist.
I absolutely believe they exist. Sometimes they'll show up as, lack of a better term, we call them messengers, where they'll pop up and, say sometimes that like a cryptic message or whatever, but that's it. They just say something to you which may or may not make sense later, but at a soul level, there is some degree of understanding. So, messengers show up once in a while. And I do know of cases where some reptilians have tried to help abductees, female abductees in particular that I know, and they were punished for it. The rest of the mob really came down on them. There was one reptilian that, lack of a better term, the gal referred to him as Joe, and Joe was helping her out from the depredations of these other reptilians that it was in the same society, right? And then when they realized that this Joe character was helping her out, they punished him, and she never heard from him again. And I know of other cases, even on our own planet, where a dominant reptilian species, we see this played out in Earth's history with humans all the time, where a dominant empire, if you will subjugate weaker nation states or weaker tribes. And that happens as well underground, where a dominant reptilian species will essentially enslave and subjugate a weaker reptilian species, turn them into slaves or whatever the case may be. And I do know that there are reptilians, for lack of a better term, that are good, that are against all this. I was doing a lot of psychic work with the Germans. We were having these Skype sessions several years back, and this reptilian was like kind of watching us over a couple of sessions. And finally, Martina, she said this through an interpreter. My German is limited, but we had a gal that spoke perfect English. And she said, well, Martina says there's a reptilian here watching us, and it's been here for the last couple of weeks. She hasn't said anything about it because it's not harming us or doing anything. And we've had these entities show up. There'd be Manus beings hanging around just watching us, right? So anyway, Martina goes through the interpreter, do you want me to ask it what it wants? And yeah, we go, sure, go ahead. And she asked it, well, what do you want? It turned out it had one of these interdimensional snake entities attached to it. It attached to its like solar plexus area where a lot of these entities attach themselves.
That's
one
happened
form
to me.
or another. And so it asked us, can you remove this from me? Right? I go, sure, let's do it. So, we put all our psychic abilities together and we made a conscious effort to detach this snake entity from this reptilian. And we did. And then it just went away, right? Now, a week later, because we were meeting weekly, a week later, we're having another Skype session with the Germans. Next thing you know, several reptilians show up. And they all had the snake entity inside of them. And they wanted us to detach the snake entities from them. Well, this is interesting. And we did. We pulled the snake entities out of them. See, what we've come to find out, because eventually literal interdimensional dragons started showing up that had these snake entities embedded in them. And when we took the snake entities out, the dragons were doing cartwheels, spinning, doing all this Yoda, acrobatic stuff. And some of the Germans who had second sight, I think sometimes it could be a blessing or a curse to have the etheric vision. Frankly, I don't want to look around and see all these interdimensional entities around me, so I'm glad I don't have that ability at the moment, right? But some of the Germans that I was working with do have that ability. So they were seeing in their etheric vision all these dragons spinning around doing cartwheels. They were so happy to have these things taken out of them. And the Germans were breaking down. They were crying. They were weeping tears of joy. And so the backstory came out, right? A lot of the dragons that were in physical form were hunted unmercifully by human bands, but the ones that had an interdimensional capability were able to escape extinction. Unfortunately, what happened was these snake entities had embedded themselves into the physical and also into some of the interdimensional capable dragons and caused them to do all this like negative King Ghidorah stuff, right? Going around attacking villages and attacking people. So they were basically abducted and used as, in drone attacks essentially, but they were being piloted all along by these snake entities. So if their backstory, if their historical message to us had any validity, that's what happened. Because a lot of these dragons see themselves as earth-based entities. They're here, they coexist on the earthly plane with nature, with us. This is why the Chinese venerate them. But in Europe, they have a entirely different understanding of them because of this snake entity infiltration thing, right?
So two things. Well, for one, I've had via one of my sessions, healer literally visualize, I guess, second sight. She was able to energetically see some type of a serpent wrapped around the base of my spine, and she was able to remove it. And quite literally, it was life-changing for me. I don't know how long it had been there, but also synchronistically, I just read yesterday, this is mainstream news, they discovered fossilized dragon in the UK, which they call an underwater dragon. It's like 36, 38 feet long, has a 6-foot diameter skull, but from above it looks like a dragon. And it's really interesting to me that they used the word dragon. They could have just called it the sea or whatever they wanted, but it's really synchronistic. I think that you're talking about that now.
Yes, and I was in comms for a while with two guys that were shakers and movers. These are young guys, shakers and movers in the rave scene. These guys were the organizers of the rave scene. And they both told me independently just how ET saturated and gray saturated and snake entity and reptilian saturated the whole rave scene was.
Oh my God, I can imagine.
Because one of the guys told me he used to, this is back when I was in San Diego, what was the Indian reservation they did the raves at? The Patanga Indian Reservation in North County, San Diego, if memory serves. And the way they would do it, they would put out like a telephone message in code or something, and it told everyone where the rave is going to be. And then in an hour's time, that message was not going to be on that phone number anymore, right? So they had an hour's worth of time to find out the location and get to the site, right? And so this guy told me there were times when they saw literal grays at these events, that there were times when he came across like 4 grays kind of laying in a square shaped pattern on the ground, right? And he said that he felt that the grays and perhaps other ETs had a role in not only the way the emo music was, but also the frequency in which it was played, but also the lyrics. For whatever songs, that had required lyrics, they had a hand in that. And we can see this played out, again, it goes back to the intrusive thoughts. What is a muse? It's like, was that really our idea to come up with a weapon of mass destruction in some lab somewhere? Why didn't we make like a longer lasting light bulb instead, right? Why does it always have to veer off into this earth destroying, civilization destroying direction, right? Where do these ideas come from? And then the other guy that I spoke to, when he was under the influence of ecstasy and other drugs, he would go into these raves and he would see with his etheric third eye vision, because it would be amped up from the drugs, right? He would see these snake entities hovering over a bunch of ravers. And he said that some of these ravers, like when they're holding a flashlight kind of light thing in their hands, and then they wave it around and dance in certain patterns. He says they do it so unnaturally fast that there's nothing normal about it, right? And he can see like grays jumping in and out of the sky. And on other occasions, he could see hovering right above a bunch of ravers on a dance floor, these snake entities. Yeah. And these snake entities are just sucking up the loosh from these ravers, and it's growing and gradually expanding and expanding. And he said he's seen it in his etheric third eye vision. These things can get so big, like, the New York skyline, these things can be as big as that when they get fully expanded, sucking up all the loosh. And you can imagine, because what they do is, they don't want us in that frequency bandwidth of like upliftment and plenitude and serenity. No, that does nothing for them. It works for us, not so much for them. So they strive at all hazards to shunt us in this lower frequency bandwidth of rage, of fear, of victimization, of all this other stuff, right? And it's constantly reinforced by the media, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of us are already in this lower frequency bandwidth anyway, which is their happy hunting ground. And you add on to that pharmaceutical drugs and, illicit drugs, et cetera, it just opens up people big time. And so, you get a focal point like a rave, and you can imagine the amount of loosh being generated at a rave. Well, and how these entities are just sucking all that up.
And okay, let's change the word rave to mass protest, because that's a little more practical right now. And I just made a post about this. It was unpopular to some people because, a lot of people I see people getting angry because everybody's just sitting on their asses and like, you need to get to the streets. We need to protest. But I made a post saying, guys, this is a spiritual war, and we can't go blindly protest without putting up protection, because these protests are honeypots for these dark entities to come and do exactly what you just described they did during that rave. They do this during the protest also. And I think this is what happened with January 6th, because I know people who came back from that. One person willingly admits that he was pretty sure he was possessed on some level after that event. And this isn't just, he's one out of thousands of people. And so we can't just blindly go out into these large groups of people, because sometimes they are a trap. Sometimes it's a honeypot. They want us to go out there. I mean, there's peaceful ways to do it, but if you are going to protest, like, go meditate on it, put up some protection, call in whatever help you need if you really feel you need to be out there in the street doing something. But it's something to think about that people don't think about, because you got to think about who is inviting you to protest, what's working through that person. And they're obviously, the reason you want to go protest is because you're being emotionally triggered on some level. Exactly. You're being emotionally triggered on some level. You feel like this is the only way I need to get out there. There's anger involved. It's usually not coming from a place of centeredness, whatever, if that's even a word.
It's a desire to, at some level, strike back, and a desire at some level to hit back at our oppressors. And we see this in different ways too, where people figuratively and sometimes literally, charge headfirst into these institutions of control, like the Federal Reserve, like these various federal agencies, what have you, the World Health Organization. But what they're doing is they're taking on the outward front, the physical plane front of this control system. It's the underlying reptilian alien control system propping it up, which we have to detach ourselves from, eventually get to a frequency bandwidth beyond their reach, ideally, right? And they can go wallow and stew in whatever kind of, reality they want, but they, or pick on someone else, but we'll be beyond their reach, ideally, right? And there is something to be said about mob mass psychosis, because I've seen this at different levels, at sporting events, at rock concerts. You have this groupthink where everyone resonates at the same frequency, and everyone gets locked into this hive consciousness. One of the rave guys told me about that. He said, just at sunrise, the music is blaring out this emo music that locks into a certain frequency anyway, right? And then he said simultaneously, he said it was a mind blower, as the sun was rising, it was completely spontaneous. Everyone raised up their arms in unison and went like, oh, and he said it just blew his mind. But that's part of that mob psychology, hive consciousness that they were plugged into, which they don't realize. And like, for example, Trump could easily have said, okay, instead of coming to the Capitol, why don't you all just go to your, the city center, the plaza, in front of your, city council where you live, and have a peaceful protest. We'll just come out in force all across the country, right? I think that would have been more effective. Why does he encourage everyone to go all the way to the state capitol, where it's just this big honey trap, like you described? And that's a key point, because even the Bible talks about this, Ephesians, where we are fighting powers and principalities. We are fighting, this is a spiritual warfare battle manifesting in the physical plane, but it's multidimensional in nature, right? So it's okay, there's aspects of us that we're not even consciously aware of that are grappling with this problem, that are dealing with this problem in more than one timeline, right? So in more than one reality even. So when we realize that we are essentially multidimensional beings, and we look at it from that standpoint, then it becomes more important to, I wouldn't say become insular, but to go inward, because through within, we can connect multidimensionally outward through the cosmos and everything else. And that's what they want us to forget. They want us to focus on the fact that the fake news, if you will, that we're mere blood bags, that we're, we have no higher purpose in life, that we're just fearful, whipped curs, which we were anything but. But, what we're seeing now play out in front of us, we've been, to use the term predictive programming, it's been in our face all this time. So not even on a subconscious level, at a conscious level, all these people that are masked up, they've already seen this movie over and over and over again. And now, and I hate to say it, and it may sound elitist, but for many of them, it's given meaning to otherwise, meaningless lives. They had nothing really to sink their teeth into, to grasp onto in the past, no real cause. Now they're like, we're in it for the survival of the human race, but it's the backwards opposite of that, right? Yeah. And so a lot of us have, long since decided, look, these people, we just wish them well, just to, keep their Karen ways to themselves, but there's nothing more you can do for them. If they've been double treated, if they've been boosted, and if they're, total mask holes, the clock is ticking on them. And unfortunately, when you talked about earlier how your friend was waking up with these thoughts of getting the stabs, right? There's a lot of people that were 100% against this, but they were held over a barrel. They got families, they got mortgages. They decided, okay, look, I'm going to fall on the sword, and I'll take one for the team, right? And they took them much against their will. Right. And see, that's, these are courageous people, and my heart goes out to them. Right.
It's not easy, and it's going to look different for everybody. I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I don't think that would happen to me, but people have families and careers and stuff that they're protecting. And when it comes down to your child, you're going to do anything for your child. And they know that. They know we all have a breaking point. We all have our weaknesses. They know because they programmed them into us. So, and there's certain groups that watch us all the time, and they know exactly what it's going to take for us to bend, for us to break. So this is just things to be cautious of. But we're going to go ahead and start wrapping this up, man. Thank you so much for coming on. Can you please let people know where they can find you?
Yes, you can go to my website, thecosmicswitchboard.com. I do consults. So if anyone's interested in having a consult about their experiences, alien abductions, interdimensional, my labs, cult abuse, whatever the case may be, feel free to go to my website. And there's a few 4 or 5 years worth now of archives on there. So, and you can also find me on Facebook and Twitter. On Twitter, I'm Cosmic Switch 29, and on Facebook, you can look me up, James Bartley.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Aaron, you've been pretty quiet over there today. You got any words to add?
No, I mean, thank you so much for coming on. Fascinating information. It was mind blowing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And thank you to Jenny Constantine for putting us together. She's a true spiritual warrior.
Right.
And, please send her my regards.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
She's definitely a warrior. That's for sure.
Yeah, she is.
We've had a few heated conversations with her on the podcast before. She's fun.
Yep.
But yeah, thank you so much, man. This has been incredible. Definitely let's hook up in the future and do this again, because there's no shortage of things to talk about. There's so many directions we could have gone, but it's to put it all in a nutshell the way you did is impressive, and thank you for that. And I know this is going to be beneficial. And guys, if this doesn't make it through the YouTube storm, if it doesn't make it on YouTube, you can find us on Rumble, obviously, to watch the video podcast, and then Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, all the audio platforms. I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but anyway, there's other places to find us. If this doesn't Odyssey. Okay. Odyssey. Yeah. And then obviously we're on Telegram, Facebook, Instagram. We're just hanging on by a thread everywhere right now. The shadow banning is real. And so we're just doing what we can. So any support you guys can give us, it all helps. It all helps. And honestly, what's more supportive than donations is just sharing this stuff. Just get this information out there. And because we're out of the algorithms. If we try and share something, it doesn't go anywhere. It's like sometimes crickets. It's almost laughable at this point. So if you guys want to help, just please share this stuff if you find it at all compelling, or if you think it's going to help somebody. And with that, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks again, James, for coming on. This was fantastic. Enjoy the rest of your day. And guys, we will see you next time. We have 2 more episodes coming to you this week. It's a busy week. I guess the universe had other plans for us this time. So stay tuned for those, and we will see you next time. Have a great evening.